welcome to this presentation about using Scotland's People, the website, for doing your Scottish research. Scotland's People is a website set up by the Government of Scotland, and for many things it's the only place you'll find that information online. The things we're going to cover today are the statutory registers, which is the Scottish name for birth, marriage and death certificates, or vital records, civil registration, whatever you want to call it. We'll also cover church records, censuses and wills. But first, a little history lesson. Scotland was a separate country with a separate monarch until 1603. Then, when Queen Elizabeth I died, James VI of Scotland also became James I of England and James I of Ireland. The three countries, Scotland, England and Ireland, shared a monarch, but they each had separate governments and separate laws. Then in 1707 the Act of Union happened, which combined the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Scotland, making Great Britain. Now, I've made a note "and Wales" after the Kingdom of England, because even though the Act didn't refer to it, the Kingdom of England actually included Wales. Wales was often a little bit of an afterthought, often not mentioned, but it was administered together with England from about the 14th century. Now, part of the result of this merger was that Scotland still retained some of its old laws and procedures even after the Act of Union. Another significant thing is that Presbyterianism became the state religion of Scotland in 1560. Before that, of course, it was Roman Catholicism. And within the Presbyterian Church, the Kirk was a very powerful thing, and the Kirk sessions often recorded very interesting things. Some of those, but not many, are available online. Now, over the years, there were many breakaway groups from the established Church of Scotland, the Presbyterian Church. A key point is with Presbyterianism is that each congregation ruled itself. It didn't have bishops and archbishops. In other words, it didn't have an Episcopalian structure. But over time, sometimes, often at the behest of a monarch, an Episcopalian structure was enforced on top of the Presbyterian Church, and then it would be removed as well. But even so, there were lots of breakaways. Now, this is a very busy slide, I know, and I don't expect everybody to be able to read the fine details. The key point is that this family tree, if you like, of the church in Scotland is busy. You can see how much it's like railroad tracks crossing. We had, for example, in 1733, a first succession, and 1747, the Burger Oath. The Burghers split into the anti-Burghers and the Burghers. They split into the Old Licht anti-Burghers and the New Licht anti-Burghers, and the Burghers split into the New Licht Burghers and the Old Licht Burghers, and then the New Licht Burghers and the New Licht anti-Burghers combined to become the United Secession Church, and so on and so forth. And you can see how complicated it is. And this is even before we get to 1843, when there is an event called the Disruption, where almost 50% of people left the established church. The established church is represented by that main line there saying Church of Scotland. Everything else is a dissenting church, and that includes down the bottom the Roman Catholic Church, because they were not adhering to the established official Church of Scotland. Now, one consequence of this is the confusion within record keeping. People could and did switch between these different churches, and it was only the official Church of Scotland, the established church, that the government was interested, only their records were official ones as far as the government was concerned. Some of those churches who later rejoined in the 20th century to the Church of Scotland have deposited their records in the National Archives of Scotland, but a lot of those other records you just won't be able to find. So what's the strategy to doing your Scottish research? As always, you start from the most recent thing and work backwards. You look for birth, death and marriage certificates if the event occurred after 1855. You look for parish registers before that point. Look for censuses to find somebody's approximate date of birth and place of birth. Look for wills. And then look for any other records like Kirk Session records, land records, and so on. Main sources that you'll find for information on Scottish research are Scotland's People, which is the only one we're concentrating on today, but Family Search, National Library of Scotland, National Archives of Scotland, and Ancestry are just some of the other places you'll find information. National Library of Scotland in particular has a wonderful set of maps, not just of Scotland but also of all England and Wales, and I do recommend you go and have a play with those at some time. National Archives of Scotland also has some important records, including records of those convicts sent to Australia after 1801. I'm afraid earlier than that I can't find any surviving records, don't know where they are. Ancestry has sporadic small collections that may only deal with one county or one small period for directories and stuff, but there are still some Scottish records there. However, as I said, I'm concentrating on Scotland's People website today. So the Scotland's People website is available at the URL of www.scotlandspeople.gov.uk. Now you can search that site without logging in, but you'll only see however many results there are, the number of them. But it is free to create a login. And whereas once upon a time there wasn't very much that you could see without using up credits, that just logging in, now there is a lot. Now those credits cost 25p each. They're available in batches of 30 for £7.50 or 40 for £10. Different record types cost different numbers of credits to view. The statutory registers and the early church records cost 6 credits each, which comes to £1.50. Wills cost 10 credits, which would be £2.50. But as I said, you can now see a lot without using credits. Whereas once upon a time you couldn't look at the indexes without credits, now you can. If you don't want to purchase credits online with a credit card, there are a number of places where you can buy vouchers, and looking at the Scotland's People website should be able to help you find out where you can locally get some of those vouchers. Now, these statutory registers, the records of births, marriages and deaths, they started in Scotland on the 1st of January 1855, which is quite a lot later than in England and Wales, but it's earlier than in New South Wales in Australia. The parish formed the basis of the registration districts. Now in England and Wales it had been the Poor Law Union, so that could be a little bit confusing and you weren't sure exactly which parish an event occurred in. So it's a little bit more straightforward here. And as an interesting aside, Scotland has officially numbered all their parishes, starting up in the far north and Shetland Isles, going right down to the southwest to Wigtonshire, going from 1 to 900 and something. So each parish does have a unique number. But you don't need to know that number to use this site. The Scottish registers contain a lot more information, these certificates, than the English certificates. And when they first started in 1855, they included an enormous amount. The New South Wales registration, which started in 1856, used as its basis the 1855 fields covered. After 1855, maybe they decided it was too much writing. They dropped a number of fields, and some of them came back from 1861. These births, deaths, and marriages certificates or images of the certificate, the information, is only available through Scotland's People, and there are restrictions on it. There is a 100-year embargo on births, 75 years on marriages, and 50 years on death, and that ticks over each year in January. Later certificates can be purchased through Scotland's People, but you will need to pay a lot more money, and you'll need to prove your right to get those certificates. Now, I know this is a very busy field, but it just gives you some idea of how much information is on those birth certificates. We have the given name and surname, whether or not a child was illegitimate, and as an aside, a child who was born illegitimate in Scotland, if his parents later married, he was made legitimate so long as there was no impediment to their marriage at the time this child was born. It also includes the date and place of birth and the time of birth, not just for multiple births. All births have the time. The gender of the child, name and surname of the father and his rank or profession, name and maiden surname of the mother, the date and place of the parents' marriage, except for a short period there, the signature and qualification of the informant, and when and where they were registered. In 1855 only, there was also the number of other children and whether they were living or deceased, the ages of both parents, birthplaces of both parents, parents' usual residence, and the child's baptismal name if it was different. Now you can see how fantastic it would be if you can find one of those 1855 certificates. The death certificates also contained a large amount of information. I'm not going to read out every single one of those because I'll show you in a few minutes where you can find that list yourself. And again, some additional information that was only on the 1855 certificates. But a little aside on deaths. Scottish women often kept using their maiden names. And deaths are indexed under both names, which can make life easier. You may find it under one name rather than the other, or a search can even be used putting in both names to help find the right person. You might also find a widow on a Scottish census being enumerated under her maiden name. So keep that in mind. Here's the list of things you'll find on marriage certificates and the additional information that you will find on 1855 certificates. Right, now we're going to actually look at the Scotland's People website. So this is the homepage of the website, and I am logged in at the moment, as you can see on the top right hand corner, and I currently have 28 credits. But I can still do some searching without using those. But before we start searching, I want to show you this, the help and guidance. This is a really valuable part of this website, especially the guidance about records and research. I can't recommend strongly enough that you spend some time looking at these guides. So we'll just look at the Statutory Registers Guide at the moment, and it gives you a lot of the background information and what's included. Tells you the kinds of record types. We're not going to cover divorces, civil partnerships or dissolutions today. It gives you hints on how to start searching and understanding them. If I select the Statutory Register of Births here, we've got a little example there. Again, some background information, how to search, what fields you can search on, and this is where I found those lists of what fields were included on the birth, marriage and death certificates. So it's there for you. You don't need to take notes. You can always look it up on the Scotland's People website. Okay, we're back now on the home page, and I'm going to do a search for James Watt. Not the engineer, but the husband of my grandmother's sister, Auntie May's husband. I'm sure everybody has an Auntie May. And we found that there's 23,137 records for men named James Watt, and it's in 5 categories. We want to look at the statutory register's birth. We're trying to find his birth. And as you can see, there's 2,888 people. Well, I'm not going to look through all of them. I know from records in Australia that he was born in he wasn't born in Wigtonshire. He was born in Lanarkshire. So I'm going to limit it to that county. Once I'd selected that county, I got a list up of the different parishes in there, but I'm not going to use that at the moment. I'm just going to limit it at the moment to Lanarkshire. And then I'm going to click Update Results. And I've still got 689 hits over 28 pages. Well, as you can see, these cover the period 1855 to 2018. I'm going to limit it. I do happen to know that he was born in 1884 because I'd found that in records in Australia already. So I'm going to limit it to that. And I have to click Update Results. And now we've only got 4 people. And again, from what I knew he was from Cambusnethan. And you can see here that I've already viewed this record. It was actually 2013 that I first looked at this record, and it recognises that I've seen it, and I can continue to look for it as many times as I like. I don't have to pay my 6 credits again. And here we have the record. I can download it as a PDF file, and if I do, it gives me the full reference for it and the date in which I'm downloading it. And there's also a number of other tools here to help you look at a record. You can zoom in. You may find inverting it so that it's white on black an easier way to read it. You can fiddle with the contrast. You can rotate things if you need to. These controls are there on every thing that you'll find downloaded on Scotland's People. But here we have our record, and I might just zoom in a little bit to make it easier to look at. Here is James Watt, born 7th of June at 9 hours and 0 minutes in the evening in PM, born in 1884 at Smithsland in Newmains. His father is William Watt, a roadman, and his mother was Jessie Watt, maiden surname Forrest. And they were married on August the 26th. I know the tail of the 6 looks hard to see, but it is there. August 26th, 1870. And we have his father's actual name written in there, his signature. And the birth was registered on the 27th of June, 1884. So that's a lot of information compared to what you're used to seeing on an English birth certificate. Now I'm going to do another search. So I can click here, start a new search. And whereas that first search that I did from the main screen let me put in very little information, we're now got some extra specific information sometimes for a search through this advanced search page. See, now that I've said that I want to search on marriages, I've got the opportunity to enter in information about the spouse. Now I'm going to look for James Watt's parents' marriage. So that was William Watt and Jessie Forrest. Now Jessie Forrest was written with two R's, but just in case, I'm going to at this point in time leave out the surname and just search for that marriage. Now I've still got 3 pages of results and 68 results, but we know the date of that marriage from James's birth certificate. So now let's just put in 1870 rather than look at every single marriage there's ever been. And update results. We always have to do that when we've changed anything. And there it is, the one record that matches. And again, you can see that I've already looked at it. So when I open it up, same controls that we're used to. And we have at the very top, again I'll zoom in a little bit to make it easier to read, the marriage of William Watt, coal miner, and Jessie Forrest, dressmaker. They were both 26 and they were married, as we said or found out already, on the 26th of August 1870 at the Close, Strathfinn, after banns, according to the forms of the Free Church of Scotland. So that is not the established church, that is one of the breakaway churches. The usual residence for William was Muir House in New Mains, but for Jessie was Wee Close in Strathfinn. William's father was William Watt, handloom weaver, and his mother was Jessie Watt, maiden surname Bogue, whereas Jessie's parents were William Forrest, a limestone miner, and Jessie Forrest, maiden surname Russell. And we have the officiating minister and witnesses. So that's wonderful. If you've looked at English certificates, you'll know that they only give the father's details, not the mother's details for each of the participants in the marriage. Now let's go back to advanced people search again to look for some deaths. Let's look for Jessie's death. Well, we know that her surname was Watt. Her given name was Jessie. Don't know when she died. So let's click search. And we've got 798 records. That's rather a lot. Let's try under her maiden name because it will be less common than Watt as a surname. And it is, but there's still 312 records. Now I could start narrowing things down by county and what have you, but in fact what I'm going to do first is put in the other surname, Watt. And now I've only got 2 possible records. We know that in 1870 when they married, Jessie was 26. That makes her birth about 1844. The Jessie who died in 1924 was 80, so that's a perfect match for the age. And she died, the registration district, which is the parish, was Cambusnethan, which is where James was born. So I think we can be pretty confident that the Jessie who died in 1924 is the one that we're looking for. You can see I haven't actually purchased that certificate at any point in time. So now I'm going to look for another example where I can show you a certificate. Update results again, we always have to do that. And here we have quite a few examples. Once again, I happen to know the exact date of this event. It's 1898. The idea here is just to show you the kinds of things that you would find. Obviously, you'd try and do everything you can to look at other records to narrow down dates of death before you actually start paying out your 6 credits. But here we have the death of, I'll zoom it in again. And I might, just to illustrate it, invert this one. Here we have Janet Thompson Morton. I'm going to switch back to the other way around because I personally find that easier to read, but not everybody agrees. She was married to William Morton. I can't rake out something or other master. She died on the 16th of February 1898 at 0 hours 45 minutes in the AM, and she died at 40 Broomgate in Lanark. She was 36 years old. Her father was John Peat, a journeyman joiner, and her mother was Mary Peat, maiden surname Peat, and the mother is already deceased. So chances are they were some kind of cousins, John Peat and Mary Peat. Janet died of carcinoma, of which she'd been suffering for 2 years. And we can see that the informant was William Morton, the widower, who was present at the time, and it was registered on the 16th of February. Doesn't include at this stage the names of all the children, which the original 1855 census death certificates did, and which New South Wales and Victoria in Australia continued to have, and that had been has proved an enormously valuable thing on those certificates. Okay, now we've finished that little demo, let's go on with the next topic, which is church records. These are the old, known as OPRs, Old Parish Registers. Those are the registers, as I've stressed several times, of the established Church of Scotland on Scotland's people. Some of these are also on Family Search, and in the days when you couldn't see the indexes without having to pay a credit, I used to recommend everybody check those Family Search ones first, narrow it down, find the right date, and then go and get the full record of Scotland's people. That's a lot less necessary now that you can view the indexes for free. Note that everything I've shown you so far, I have not used a single one of my existing credits. As you'll see when we go back again, I will still have the same 28 credits. There are some records for the Roman Catholic Church and some other Presbyterian Church records also on Scotland's people. But these church records have no standard format. Rose's Act, which introduced pre-printed formats for births and burials in 1812 in England and Wales, never applied in Scotland. Neither did Hardwicke's Marriage Act, which introduced those forms for the marriage in 1754. Neither did the 1837 Act, which introduced civil registration in England and Wales, and it changed the format of the marriage and birth, changed the format of the marriage records. They've also very, very much in their commencement date. The earliest one is from 1553, and that's a parish in Perthshire, but most of them start in about the 1700s. Some, however, don't start until the 19th century. And unfortunately, some have not survived. It's always the way. And it's probably the exact one that you want. Burials are also often not recorded. You might be lucky that minister may have recorded the burials, or it may be that the only way you can find indication of when somebody has died is in the Kirk Session records with the hire of the mort cloth, which was a black cloth that went on the coffin. And rather than having to buy a new one, sometimes people just hired it, particularly if money was short. There were other events that may not have been recorded as well, and part of that is because of cost, especially between 1783 and 1794, when stamp duty of 3 pennies was charged for every event that was recorded. And they also may not have been recorded because your ancestors may have been one of those dissenter church groups, not part of the established Church of Scotland. And it's been estimated that in some urban parishes, so in the cities, only about 30% of events were recorded. So you may not be lucky, but then you may. So let's have a look at those old parish registers. So here we are, we're back on Scotland's People, and as you can see on the top right hand corner, I still have my 28 credits. Nothing I have done today has cost me anything. I'm going to go to the Advanced People search. I always find advanced searches are often usually better because they allow you to add more information. And I'm going to go to church registers this time instead of statutory registers. And we're starting with births and baptisms. Now, as you can see, it has highlighted the Church of Scotland, so it's defaulting to defaulting to searching the Church of Scotland registers. But you could also search Roman Catholic or other Presbyterian church records. Now, I'm going to put in the name of a man who came to Australia, to Western Australia, as a convict and try and find his birth or baptism. He was convicted in Aberdeenshire, and his name is spelt all sorts of different ways. In this case, I've got 39 records. That's not too bad. The records in Australia give varying dates of birth for him. They would lean you to believe a date of birth between 1834 and 1836. Now, there may only be 2 pages, but I find things so much easier if they're in date order. And yes, I can search by date at any of these fields. In this case, I'm searching by date. If I scroll down, not this page, we'll have to look at page 2. Scroll down again, and we have a huge, great big gap there between 1826 and 1843. So he's not there. In fact, even more, if I limit it to his name David, that can make us even more certain. With that name David, there is only one record. But as I said, this person or this family have so many different spellings of their name. So I'm going to put this from exact name matching to fuzzy matching. Notice that you can also search with wildcards or beginning with, known name variants, etc. In this case, I'm going to go with fuzzy matching and update the results. Again, I'm going to sort by date. Now, this time, we do have one that looks potentially correct. David Sieve Wright, and that is a spelling that I've seen, S-I-E-V Wright. I've also seen S-E-I-V Wright, S-E-I-V-E Wright, etc. Numerous spellings, sometimes without the W as well. But this particular man was born in 1833 in the parish of Birse, which is now a suburb of Aberdeen, which is where he was convicted. So that's very likely that that's the right person. And if you look up even further, there is another baptism in that parish in 1778, who I suspect, as another David, is probably the father of the convict. Now you can see I haven't paid for any of these registers, but I'm still getting an awful lot of information nonetheless. But let's change it all so that we're looking at somebody where I can show you the record, where I have looked at it. I'm going to look for Jean Hunter. Update results. I'm not going to look through 916 records, but I happen to know that this family was from Wigtonshire, so this time I will select Wigton. Update results. And I'm down to just 10. And you can see that there's one that I've looked at already. Jean Hunter, the daughter of William Hunter and Margaret Stewart. Now, as I said, parish registers, they all vary what information you've got, and some ministers have better writing than others. This one is a lovely minister because you can see he's put everything in boxes, so you don't have everything overlapping each other and making it hard to read. But there we have William Hunter and Margaret Stewart in Canningarroch, perhaps, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, had a daughter, Jean, baptised on the 24th of September 1834 and born on the 21st of September. So that's sort of indication of the kind of things that you may find in a baptism, but they will vary enormously, and sometimes the handwriting will be better than others. Let's now try and find that marriage of William Hunter and Margaret Stewart. So I'm looking at church registers, banns and marriages. I'm also going to put in the wife's maiden name, Margaret. I am not going to specify a county in this case. Now we know that they had a child in 1834, so let's only, to limit the numbers, let's go from say 1825 to 1834. I know sometimes people have a child before they're married, but let's just try it this way. And we're down to 15. I'm going to sort by date. And you'll see we've got two records there for Margaret Stewart and William Hunter in these marriages. First one is from the parish of Girvan, which is in Ayr, and the second one is Stonykerk, which is in Wigtonshire. So I'm going to look at that first one, the Girvan one. And I scroll down, again, lovely minister, nice easy to read writing. And we have William Hunter of Girvan. Remember, that may or may not be where he's born. It's just where he was living at that time. and Margaret Stewart of Stonykirk, and banns were read out on the 13th and the 20th of April, and they were married by the Reverend Mr. Anderson of Stonygate on the 24th of April 1834. So this register from Girvan is just the banns, and in fact if we scroll back to the top you'll see that banns of marriage. Banns have to be read in both parishes if the parties are from different parishes. And when we look at the second record, the Stonykirk record, William Hunter and Margaret Stewart, the former in the parish of Girvan and the latter in this parish, had their names enrolled for proclamation of banns upon the 19th and were married upon the 24th day of April 1834. So there we've got the two different entries. An additional value of having these two entries available through Scotland's People is if one of the entries, one of the surnames or given names was hard to read because the writing was bad, you've got these two copies. You may not always find two copies, but if you do find the two banns, or the banns and marriage, that would be a great advantage potentially. And finally, the other kind of old parish record to look at are the burials. So, church records of deaths. Remember, as I said, not everything, these aren't deaths, these are burials. Not every burial will be recorded. But let's see what we can find for Thomas Hunter from Wigtonshire. Now notice that little thing's going around, it's thinking about things, and now it has limited the parishes to the parishes in Wigtonshire. If you wanted to narrow it down to parish, you could. At this point I'm not going to do that. We have one entry from Stonykirk, which you'll remember was where Margaret Stewart was living at the time of the marriage, and it doesn't say an awful lot though. Thomas Hunter died the 9th and was buried the 13th of September. This is 1852, and he was aged 69. So even when you do have a record, you're not going to have a lot of information in those burial entries. Incidentally, remember I mentioned that every parish has a unique number. This parish was 898, and yes, it is right down the southwest of Scotland. I've illustrated to you searching by dates, but you can sorting by dates, but you can sort by any of these fields. So the next thing we're going to talk about are censuses in Scotland. They took place on the same dates as in England and Wales in 1841 and each subsequent 10 years after that. Now there are versions of censuses on Ancestry, Find My Past, Family Search and FreeCen, but they are transcripts. They do not have images of the original census census entry, and they may have errors in them, as all transcriptions may, and they don't have all the information. The only place to see the actual image is on Scotland's People. And not surprisingly, we get to them via this census returns. And you can see that there are all the various dates available there. I'm going to look at 1841 for William Hunter. And we know they were living in Wigtonshire. If a name was really unusual, I might not bother to narrow it down, but Hunter is not that unusual. And there he is, in Kirkmaiden. Now remember, with the 1841 census, the ages were supposed to be rounded down to the nearest 5 years. So that doesn't really mean that William Hunter was aged 30. He could have been 30, 31, 32, 33, or 34. Similarly with his wife Margaret. But we still see that they're living at Logan Mains, and William was an agricultural labourer. It says here that he was born in this county. Now that may or may not be correct, but if you'll remember, his marriage entry said that he was living in Girvan at the time. So in this family we've got William and his wife Margaret, their daughter Jean, son Thomas, Margaret and James. So that's what you see for an 1841 census. Let's look for him in 1851. I'm going to sort it by the registration district name. You can see that there's nobody called William Hunter living in Kirkmaiden. There is one William living in Stonykirk, but he's only aged 17. So our family isn't there. In fact, by this stage they had moved to South Australia. But because of the proximity, let's have a look at that Stonykirk record. Now this is the first time I've said to look at a record that I hadn't already looked at, and you can see here that it asks me to confirm that the purchase, because I would now be purchasing that record, and it'll tells me that it's going to cost me 6 credits and gives me the chance to back out if I'd accidentally hit it. In this case I'm going to say OK. And now you see my credits have gone down 6 to 22 instead of 28. And here we have this 1851 census record. And there is our William Hunter as a farm servant. This particular one was born in Ireland, so he's probably not related to ours at all. But as with England, the 1851 census gives a lot more information than the 1841, and all the subsequent ones are the same too. We have the exact age, we have the relationship to the head of the household, we know whether they're married or single or widowed, and we have their place of birth. So it is, as well as their occupation. So it is very worthwhile. It's important to look at their censuses, and when you've found the censuses, they can give you that clue to help you find the right person in either the old parish registers or in the statutory registers. Now the last thing we're going to cover are wills. There are a few other things on the Scotland's People site, but this is the last thing I'm going to cover today. It's very important to understand that the system of handling the effects of a deceased person is completely different than in England. Until 1868, you could not leave land or houses in a will. You could only leave movable goods. Land and houses went by the system of primogeniture, which is usually to the oldest son, but it may be to a brother if there were no son, no children, or what have you. You had no choice about this. That's where the land had to go at that time. So if the deceased left a will, and that will only deal with his movable property, it is called a testament testamentar, which is like saying a probate. If there was no will, equivalent of an administration in England, it's a testament dative. The law already dictated that 1/3 of the movable goods had to be left to the widow, 1/3 to the children, and then 1/3 could be disposed of by the person who was dying by his will. That's called the deeds part, or the dead person's part. And those proportions were down to half and half if there was either no surviving spouse or children, or if he had neither spouse nor children, then he could dictate what he bequeathed, all his movable goods. But married women could not leave a will until 1882. The only women who could would be spinsters or widows. As I say, the inheritance of property was handled in a completely different manner than a will or a testament. And you had to go through a legal process through the courts to recognise the next heir, and that's called the service of heirs, or the returs. Now, because the eldest son may not get or will get all the land, he may not be mentioned in a will. That doesn't mean he's died, and it doesn't necessarily mean he's died. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's any problem between his father or parents and him. It just could be that he's going to get plenty with the land. So the wills are under legal records, wills and testaments, and in this case I'm going to look for the will of a Henry Sanderson who died in 1877. Note here that before I actually do the search, we've got commissary courts and sheriff's courts. Initially, all wills were proved in commissary courts, but after a certain date they were proved in sheriff courts. And if I wanted to, I could limit by which court the will was, we don't say proved, in fact you'd get a confirmation of the will. And I have two records here for Henry Sanderson. Surgeon of Musselburgh in near Edinburgh, and it says that it tells me already that he died on the 3rd of December 1876. Testate, i.e. he left a will, and we have two entries. One is the will, and we'll have a little look at that, which was proved at the Edinburgh Sheriff's Court. And this has lovely writing. It is so easy to read. You won't always be that lucky, particularly with earlier ones. But the site has, Scotland's People has some great guides to helping you learn to read old Scottish writing. And this one says that it was proved at Edinburgh, it says at Edinburgh the 21st day of December in the year 1876, in the presence of the Lords of Council and Session, compeered, that means appeared. You will find some strange words in Scottish wills that you aren't used to in most English or any other kind of wills. So compeered George Munro and Robert Lee, Esquires, advocates procurators for the parties after named, and designed and gave in the trust disposition and deed of settlement and codicils underwritten, desiring the same might be registered in their lordships' books, confirmed to law, which desire that the said lord blah 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 follows, whereof the followed we Henry Sanderson surgeon, and I can look at the next page. The 10 credits that it cost me to get this includes all the pages of that will. In Musselburgh, and Agnes Tom, daughter of the deceased John Tom, residing in Musselburgh and spouse to the said Henry Sanderson. Notice how his wife Agnes Tom was referred to by her maiden surname, not her married surname, considering that no marriage contrast, and it goes on and on and on. We have pages and pages of information on that. And the other document there is the confirmation, which will always include an inventory of the deceased's goods. Confirmation is like the probate statement. At Edinburgh, the 6th day of March, 1877, the following inventory of the personal estate of the deceased Henry Sanderson and deeds relative to the disposal thereof, presented by Mr. Charles P. Finlay, W.S. Inventory of the personal estate and effects wheresoever situate of Henry Sanderson, sergeant in Musselburgh, who died at Musselburgh on the 3rd day of December, 1876. And he had 13 shillings cash in hand. He had household furniture, silver plate and other effects to the value of £318 14 shillings, some sums due under deposit receipt of the Commonwealth Commercial Bank. And we can look at the next page. Of course, I could download these as PDFs as well, just like I can with everything. The Commercial Bank of Scotland, he had £278, and that made a total of £163, 9 shillings and 7 pence, and so on. So you see the full details of the inventory, and you get some idea of the wealth or lack of wealth of the deceased person. Don't assume that somebody was too poor to leave a will. Sometimes it's the poorest people who are most adamant about leaving a will. They are very upset and have this idea they want to make sure who does get their 3 teaspoons. Because yes, I have seen wills that leave 1 teaspoon to this person, 1 teaspoon to that person, and another teaspoon to that, and the wearing apparel to another person. Also, a rich man may not necessarily need to leave a will, particularly if he only has 1 son, and that's going to inherit everything. Always worth looking for. You never know what you find. Wills can be a fantastic source, and as I say, these ones the writing isn't too bad. Earlier ones it could be difficult, in which case I would look under help and guidance. Check the guides, see what you can find. I think I'd try and look, we have interesting guides there about dates, numbers and sums of money. And we have a reading old handwriting guide. So if you're stuck, you can start learning to read handwriting. Well, that's really all I want to cover today from Scotland's People. As you probably saw, there are a few other things there, but I covered the basics here, and I think that's enough for today. And I hope that this has helped you learn how to navigate your way around the website and that you have great success with your Scottish research. Thank you.